Thank you so much for that sweet introduction. To all of you who are admitted students, my congratulations to you on your admission to this law school and to other wonderful law schools. I'm honored to have this opportunity to share with you. And later today, if you have any questions or issues that you'd like to discuss with me, or if you want to give me a call, send me email, I would really look forward to talking with each and every one of you. USC and this wonderful law school are my home. I want to welcome you today to my home. Today I welcome you as guests, but soon I hope that my home will also be your home. I say my home, but it is truly our home. Those of us who are faculty here, students and staff here, all feel this way. So I believe I'm speaking for our entire community when I say, this is our home. Please make yourselves at home. Please make this your home. Law school as home? This sounds preposterous. And it is preposterous if home means a retreat from the world, a private sphere that shuts out the world. But why should we think of home as a place for hiding from others or from life's harsh facts? Isn't home instead the place that strengthens us so that we are able to wrap our arms around life? Isn't home the place that supports us and challenges us and encourages us, making us strong enough to live life to the fullest? Law school as home? Preposterous! And it is preposterous if home means the place we come from, our childhood home. We in this room were children in many different parts of this country and of the world. But is home limited to the place where we were born, to the places where we were children? Don't we need sometimes to leave behind the scenes of our childhood, our youth, to truly come home as we grow into ourselves and into the responsibilities that define our mature lives? Law school as home? That is preposterous. It's preposterous if home means a physical space that you're in and day out, year after year, decade after decade, for 1 decade, 2 decades, or 3. Now, as it happens, as you've heard, I have been here for 3 decades. You will not be here for 3 decades unless the dean makes you repeat an incredible number of your classes. But why should we think of home as mere coordinates on a physical, geographical plane? Isn't it better understood as coordinates that locate us on maps of purpose, identity, and meaning? Home is where the heart is. That's why our law school is our home. That's why our law school is my home. It strengthens me. You strengthen me to wrap my arms around this great and terrible world. You challenge me and encourage me as I grow into my responsibilities. Responsibilities that include seeing what is right, speaking what is right. The topics we talk about together, and just as importantly, the way that we talk about them together, respectfully, even lovingly, help me triangulate and find my bearings, find my way. USC, this wonderful law school, is my home. Welcome to this home, our home. Now, those of you who are admitted students, when this lunch is over, I want you to talk with our current students and faculty and staff and ask them, is he right? is this place really home? Now, they're either going to say yes or no. If they say yes, that is clearly probative evidence that I am right. If they say, no, he's wrong, here are 3 reasons why Garet is operating with a false conception of home, that's also probative evidence that I'm right. Because our students and faculty and staff are more than happy to disagree. Because they trust to the community, they trust to the home. They realize this is a space where it's okay to disagree. So whatever you hear is going to be confirming evidence. This is indeed our home. In my office this week, 3 students from my fall semester first-year class just dropped by to say hello, and the 4 of us proceeded to get into an argument that lasted for 1 hour. That is home. Not the rocking chair, not the gladiolas in the garden. Those are not the things that make home. But the readiness to share and engage, knowing that you can air it out with one another because the love is there, and pressing the issues together will not make us further apart, but will bring us closer together. In a faculty meeting this week, after I had spoken to the issue on the agenda, one of my colleagues responded to my comments by saying he had no use for one of my arguments, and that in his mind it did no work of justification at all. He made his point forcefully. Later in the afternoon, I dropped by his office to thank him for expressing his disagreement and doing so forcefully. The visionary poet and artist William Blake wrote that opposition is true friendship. Opposition is true friendship. My colleague is my true friend, and a willingness to oppose, a capacity to oppose, the strength to oppose, a productive, creative opposition. These are key parts of the true friendship that makes our law school a true home. Now, those of you who have been in classes with me know 2 things about me. First, I am shameless. And second, I have what could kindly be described as an eclectic taste in music. You also know there's a relationship between these 2 things because I seemingly have no shame about revealing my eclectic taste in music. So those of you who I'm today meeting for the first time are about to experience all of this firsthand. Because before my remarks are over, I will have inflicted upon your patience 2 lyricists who ordinarily do not appear together in the same sentence, let alone on the same CD or collected on the same iPod. They are Nas and Rodgers and Hammerstein. But I'm not going to identify which is which. Will you be able to figure out which is which? Especially because I may not be quoting the lyrics exactly right, since I'm going to be doing it from memory. In failing to make proper attribution, and in potentially getting the lyrics mixed up, will I be violating the Copyright Act? Compare your answers with a friend after lunch. Now, I hope you'll forgive me if I take a moment to mention a phrase that has already been mentioned today at lunch. It's pretty well known around here, the Trojan family. I'm holding in my hand the wedding invitation that I received from Lori Lynch, a lawyer in Atlanta, who graduated from the law school a number of years ago. Lori negotiates real estate transactions. She tells me that often when the deal is going down, she looks around and she finds that she is the only black woman in the room, that she is the only woman of color in the room. She is a pioneer. She's a brave and strong person. Now, you've heard about sharing weddings together, birthday parties together. That's part of what makes this place home, and it's a special thing to be invited by a former student to her wedding. The fact that she'd want me to be there at her wedding rather than never see me or anyone else at the law school ever again illustrates one obvious meaning to the Trojan family, and that is we form close connections here, and often they are lifelong connections. We're there in the classroom, but we're also there at your swearing-in ceremony when you become a member of the bar. We're there when you get married, when your children get bar mitzvahed and bat mitzvahed. You can't get rid of us. But Lori illustrates the deeper meaning of the Trojan family. When she was in my class during the first semester of her first year of law school many years ago, she said something that I will never forget. And I think that no one in that class will ever forget it. It was the last day of class for the semester. Business was done. Class was adjourned. Everyone was closing their books and getting ready to leave when Lori jumped up and said, wait a minute, class isn't done yet. I have something to say. Now, this was very unusual, but everyone did as they were told. They put their books down and they sat back down and they listened. Lori said, I have found this semester very challenging. When I came here in the fall, I was anxious. I looked around me and I saw students from places like Yale and Penn and Berkeley. I come from Spelman, she said, one of the historically black colleges. I knew that you were the smartest students from around the country, but when I was a kid, I was diagnosed with a learning disability. But I want you to know how much I'm learning here, that I'm not scared anymore, because I realize now that this law school is my home. Now, you can well believe that there were tears in the eyes of many students as she spoke. And there were tears in my eyes, and I get emotional just remembering that time today. Lori was giving us, at that moment, much more than she ever could have been receiving. She was the teacher. But the point is that for her and for all of us already, we were the Trojan family. And we were the Trojan family long before she remembered her old law professor and invited him to her wedding. Now, weddings and marriages are powerful symbolic events, powerful devices for enacting home and community. It speaks highly for the law school that people fall in love here, that some of them get married here, and that we're a part of that intimate life, those pledges, those commitments. In fact, my wife has married several members of the faculty. I don't think that came across quite exactly as I meant it. She's an ordained minister, and she's presided at the weddings of several members of the faculty. But as we all know, marriage is itself a hotly contested, legally constructed institution. Historically, the legal construction of marriage was a device for effacing or suppressing the agency of women, as their legal powers were absorbed by the husband. Law's devices for creating and protecting marriage also have served over the generations to hide and conceal and protect domestic violence. But of course, in this day, our eye is on the ways in which some laws define who is eligible to marry, while yet other laws are appealed to or enacted in order to change those limitations. This process of legal construction and challenge is typical of the social realities and transitions we study in law school, and that we become a part of as lawyers. Consider in that light a case that the California Supreme Court has agreed to hear. I know about the case because a law school classmate of mine asked me whether I'd be willing to participate in it. As you've heard, I graduated from this law school in 1981. Here we are, more than a quarter of a century later, and we members of that class still see one another socially. We still call upon one another for expertise and connections. That's the obvious meaning of the Trojan family. My classmate said, this case involves religion. I think I'd better call Garet. Okay, that's part of the Trojan family. But it goes much deeper than that. Our home life goes way beyond networking. Our school is our home not just because we make connections here, but because here we learn to be challenged, to think through hard questions of legal policy. We're welcomed into a tough world of opposition. And here we find purpose, identity, and meaning in our lives. The facts of this pending case, briefly, are as follows. Plaintiff and her partner sought assistance from defendant OBGYN doctor and clinic. The plaintiff explained to the doctor that she wanted to get pregnant, and she sought infertility treatment. She also disclosed that she was a lesbian. Plaintiff and her partner explained to the doctor that they wanted to use a process called IVI, in which the patient can personally inject sperm into her vagina. The doctor told the patient and her partner that she would help prepare them for IVI. But she also explained that if IVI did not work, and the patient later sought out a more invasive procedure called IUI, she, the doctor, would be unable, for religious reasons, to perform that procedure. In IUI, the doctor injects the sperm directly into the patient's uterus. The doctor said that her religious beliefs prevented her from performing IUI on unmarried patients. The doctor also explained that if IVI did not work, and if at a later time the patient decided to undergo IUI, the doctor would assist the patient by referring her to another doctor. Later, when IVI failed and the clinic referred the patient elsewhere for IUI, the patient sued the doctor and the clinic. One of the main causes of action was under a California state statute called the Unruh Act. The Unruh Act prohibits business establishments in this state from discriminating on various grounds in the delivery of goods and services. Plaintiff claimed that the clinic discriminated against her on the basis of her sexual orientation. Defendants claimed that they weren't discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation at all. Instead, that they applied the same standard to all unmarried persons. But defendant also argued that even if the trier of fact should conclude that there was sexual orientation discrimination, the Unruh Act ought to be seen as limited by an implied exception to protect the doctor's freedom of religious conscience. The defendant argued that this limitation is inherent in the history and purpose of the Unruh Act itself and also required by the religious liberty clauses of the state and federal constitutions. My classmate wanted me to write an amicus brief on behalf of various churches and faith organizations, a brief that would invite the California Supreme Court to hold that freedom of religious conscience sets limits to the anti-discrimination scope of the Unruh Act. And my friend sent me one of the briefs that had already been written, and I read that brief, and I said to myself, whoa, is this case hard? Should the issues be resolved as a matter of statutory interpretation or as a matter of constitutional law? There are other statutes in California that provide some limited protection for freedom of conscience for a limited range of healthcare workers under certain situations. How do those freedom of conscience statutes equilibrate with the anti-discrimination rule in the Unruh Act? Maybe that would be resolved by the legislature rather than being boxed out by constitutional decision by the state Supreme Court. What degree of protection should the healthcare worker's freedom of conscience receive as compared to that same worker's freedom to try to stay true to her faith in other aspects of her life, such as her worship life with her faith community? Now here I am. I've been studying these things for more than 25 years, and I look at a case that is fresh on my desk, and I say to myself, whoa, is that hard? But I'm not discouraged because I'm prepared for the difficult case. Because much of the conversation and the education here in the law school is about hard cases. The cases we read and discuss and argue in law school are often difficult and demanding. because real current cases, like this one, are often difficult and demanding. And ultimately, that is because life in this world is often difficult and demanding. Sexual orientation, the meaning and effect of discrimination, partnership, pregnancy, parenting, religious liberty, freedom of conscience. All of these concepts and more are loaded with meanings that they derive from our human life experience. In many settings, including academic settings, we can learn little or nothing about these concepts from one another and with one another. For precisely this reason, they're too loaded, too personal, too deep, too emotional, too contested. They're the kinds of things you can safely talk about at home, but not at school or at the office. But if your school is your home, you can talk about all of these things. And you can talk about them in a way that has reality content, that bears the promise of growing you and enriching your understanding. All of this is true if the law school is your home, and home is where the heart is, and opposition is true friendship. When your law school is your home, and home is where the heart is, you realize that law is more than just a complicated mill in which concepts, such as those that I've mentioned, grind against each other, somehow producing a result. The terms and the concepts of the law embody some of our own beliefs and ideals. Therefore, questions of legal policy, such as those at stake in this case, test the meaning and effect of our own commitments. The Interact begins by saying that all people in this state are free and equal. I believe that. I believe that all people in this state are free and equal. You believe that all people are free and equal. But what does that mean? And what does that require? Though I'm not a party to the suit, I have high stakes in it, as do all of us, because all of us are committed to the freedom and equality of persons. For all of us in this room, the case challenges us to rise to that commitment. The case is not only about what I do or about what I know, it's also about who I am. And therefore, it forces me to a decision. Now, if the issue were only about what I can do, my skill set, what I know, I would have gone ahead and participated in writing the brief that I was invited to participate in. But I declined to participate in writing that brief because I disagreed with the position that the lawyers wanted to take. I think they're wrong about the meaning of the proposition that all of us are free and equal. As I thought about the matter, I realized that my best understanding of the principles required me to go in a different direction. Now, reasoned arguments can be made on both sides of this case, which is typical of hard cases that come up to high courts for decision. If we had time today and argued the matter together, there'd be a range of views in this room, and that's as it should be. And because this law school is home and home is where the heart is, we'd actually dare to put our beliefs at risk, expressing them to one another, and in that way making ourselves vulnerable to one another. We would challenge and support one another along the way. And in doing so, we would grow up together and build each other up. And that's one important aspect of sharing home together. You're going to find that the cases you read in law school, not all of them, but many of them, not only make you think deeply, they make you feel deeply. And that there is a subterranean passage that connects your deep thinking with your deep feeling. Home is where the heart is. You may think that law school will only involve your head, not your heart. You're right about the head, but you're wrong about the heart. You will read cases in law school that make your head spin, but you will read cases that make your heart ache. A mother drowns her little children in the bathtub. Did she act with diminished capacity? Does her despair and sadness in the circumstances of her life partially excuse her? While you read, you're thinking about hard concepts of freedom and responsibility, the inherent value of human life, mental health and mental illness, the social construction of parenting, and society's resources or lack of resources for those who are hurting deep inside. But while you are reading and thinking about these things, you too are hurting deep inside. Your sadness, your anger seek expression. It is a case worth crying about and a case worth thinking about. To think deeply about the case, you need the assistance of experts on criminal law, doctrine, and practice, on philosophical issues of freedom and responsibility, on the history and politics of the family, on psychology. You will find all of these experts here. But to think deeply about the case, you also need to acknowledge your own feelings, your own response to the story, the way that the facts touch your own vulnerabilities. You're going to find that you can't hold the case at arm's length. It challenges you more than you expected. It threatens you more than you wanted to be threatened. And that's when you need to be in a trusting community. You want to be able to say to yourself, my teachers understand that there is hurt, that there is sadness, that there is anger, including anger at fate, anger at injustice. My teachers have those feelings too. But it's not just the cases we read that remind us constantly, perhaps inconveniently, but nonetheless effectively, that we are human beings who have great depths of human response. It is also, and much more so, the clients whom we represent. I remember very well walking into my seminar one day. All of us were wearing our kind of typical law school grungies, except one student who had on a black suit. Interviewing today? I asked her. Her answer made me feel about that big. I'm going to my client's funeral today, she said. Now, my student worked in the post-conviction justice clinic, as I hope that many of you will. She had represented an inmate in the Terminal Island prison, federal prison here in Los Angeles. Her client had died. And his family asked her to come to the funeral. They told her, she said, they told her, you are the only person we have ever known who understands how things work. What a thing to happen to you as a second-year law student. Did she sign up for that when she signed up for post-conviction? No, it was more than she bargained for. She was learning an important lesson about feelings and their relationship with being a lawyer. And she shared that with me, and I learned an important lesson from her. I'll tell you a story about my colleague, Professor Niels Frenzen. Professor Frenzen directs our immigration clinic. His office was next to mine, and it was the night before Thanksgiving. Both of us were working late in our offices, and I heard him talking on the telephone. Now, normally I don't eavesdrop on my colleagues' telephone conversations, I want you to know. But Professor Frenzen was talking louder and louder. And soon he was yelling into the phone, "You've won! You're not going to be deported. No, 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 you can stay here." And I felt like I was listening in on a scene from a holiday movie, like It's a Wonderful Life. Only this was a little different because it was a Thanksgiving movie and not a Christmas movie, and it starred Niels Frenzen rather than Jimmy Stewart. But for some of the clients in our immigration clinic, deportation means death. And Professor Frenzen was telling his client, you're going to stay here. You're going to live. You've won. Home is where the heart is. And it's not just because of the cases we read or the clients we represent, but because life and death go on all around us as we do our work. I have seen my students sobbing with grief and loss as they tried to cope with the death of a parent, a brother, or a sister. The tears will not be segregated. They will not be relegated to private spaces, but the tears will spill out in the law library, in the hallways, in classrooms. And every time I have seen one student in tears, I have seen a classmate reach out to that needy student with understanding and support, person to person, friend to friend. Not too long ago, my friend, Professor Jody Armour, whom you'll meet, I think, a little later this afternoon, played some music for me. We walked over to the parking structure. Professor Armour rummaged through his massive collection of CDs, found what he was looking for, and then we sat in the car and listened. And soon enough, I was crying in grief. I hadn't even known that I was grieving. I was grieving for my father, whose loss I was feeling more than I knew. Can we please have a moment to mourn? As day comes and nights fall, for the rest of our lives we'll miss y'all. And even though life must go on, we still mourn while wishing y'all were home. I was grieving for the lost lives of people I never even knew. Or maybe I should say I knew them, but until then I hadn't realized how well I knew them. Grieving for my brothers doing years in confinement, and for my soldiers who passed over no longer living, that couldn't run whenever the Reaper came to get them. For every mother that held a son in the street bleeding, crying a song of sorrow, too dark and deep for speaking. Just a moment outside the day-to-day struggle to let the ones we really care about know that we love them. And now, every time I hear the song, I realize that there's no fixed limit to the ones we really care about. Who are in our minds and hearts as we meet today? Who do we salute if we salute those who's gone with bullets? Grief and loss are private feelings, but they are much more than that. These feelings have much to teach us about life and death and about our rights and responsibilities. When your law school is your home, you do not have to check your feelings at the door and ignore or suppress them all day long until you go home at night, not when the law school is your home. Now, each year, Professor Armour invites students to his house. He has a very big house to discuss these issues together, and especially to keep probing issues of racial justice that are raised in the classroom. Now, your first reaction on walking into his house and seeing the whole Los Angeles basin spread out before you, gleaming in the sunshine or twinkling in the night, your first reaction is to say to yourself, wow, how does he work this? And your second reaction is, how do I get a house like this? But then your deeper reaction sets in as you realize it may not be your house, but what is going on there is indeed part of your home. Professor Armour is inviting you into his home when he invites you into his house, but he's also inviting you into his home when he's here at school, because home is where the heart is. In February of this year, Professor Armour invited us into his home in the biggest way ever, when we held Race, Rap, and Redemption in Bovard Auditorium here on campus. 1,000 people in the audience, including law students and law faculty, and students and a faculty from across the university community, and young people from local public schools affiliated with USC. And we use the medium of dance, of poetry, and song to explore the future of racial justice in America. Where is the challenge? Where is the hope? What contribution can and should I make? The law school encouraged Professor Armour and me as we developed the event and stood by us in good times and bad because the law school is our home. Race, Rap, and Redemption was also part of a series of university-sponsored events called Visions and Voices. These events are open free of charge to all USC students. These events include a play, Are You Now or Have You Ever Been?, based on the investigation of show business by the House Un-American Activities Committee during the Cold War era. Very relevant to national security issues today. Other programs on the resistance to Stalinism. Rwanda, Portraits of Survival and Hope, an exhibit at the California African American Museum, which is right across the street from the law school, along with film and discussions exploring the horrific genocide in Central Africa, the testimony of the survivors, implications for the world's response in Darfur. Other programs on Holocaust survivors, in which they tell how they rebuilt their lives after World War II. Spike Lee, America Through My Lens. Class diversity among Asian Americans. Issues in medical ethics and the social responsibilities of scientists. I mention all of these events, which are accessible to all of us here at the law school, to show how a USC education is rich and multidimensional, and how talent throughout the university, not only in the humanities and the social sciences, but also in science and the arts, is made available to each one of us. Each one of us comes to law school with a vision. Each of us comes to law school with a voice. In the very best law school experience, we gain clarity of vision as we learn together, and strength and beauty of voice. Home is where the heart is. Do not leave your visions and voices behind when you come to law school. Share as accurately and passionately as you can your best response to your cases, your clients, your classmates. There is no finer sight for you to see. Come home. Come home. You will find a world of honest friends who found you. You will take the hands of men and women whose hands are strong. And with these men and women all around you, you will know that you are home where you belong, where there's work to do, where there's love for you for the love you give. There is no better life for you to live. Come home. Come home. Thank you.